You looking forward to this?
Yeah.
Have you got all your questions?
Yeah.
Hard? Maybe some. Can I just introduce you? We've got David Turnbull from Turnbull Home Hardware down in High Street. Ian Donald used to have Sweet News down in High Street. And Brian Ferguson used to have Ferguson's Pharmacy down in High Street. And these guys have come along to answer your questions, and we're very grateful that you've got us here. So, David, would you like to maybe start with a wee introduction, please?
So it's David Turnbull from Turnbull's Home Hardware down the street. It's a family business and it's been in the family for 55 years. My father went into it, went after school, as I did. I went into it after school. So although it's been a hardware store in our family for 55 years, it's 130 years at least that it's been a hardware, or ironmongers as they were known back then, store. And over that time back then, they would have sold things like baths, and it hired out cutlery sets to some of the richer holiday homes, things like that. Nowadays, we would sell everything from electric drills to cooking utensils, gardening, sledges, and Christmas lights, an awful lot of Christmas lights, which some of you may have seen in the store. And that, I think, is, I was going to say it's been extended a couple of times. The building has got bigger twice, and then about a year ago I bought the garden out the back next door to make a bigger garden area. And that is my story.
Thanks very much, David. Ian, ask you, please.
Hi everyone. I run Sweet News. I came to North Berwick. I was never in North Berwick before, and I came to North Berwick in 1996. And I bought the business of Sweet News at the west end of the High Street. It's known as a CTN, that is a confectionery, tobacco and news. That's really what they started off as in the early days. I ran it for 11 years until I retired in 2007. So that's quite a while ago now. During that time, we had to change quite a number of things from being just confectionery, news and tobacco, mainly because of the supermarkets and the supermarkets' pressure on the smaller businesses. And we took on cards, greetings cards, we took on a wide range of magazines, and we also took on stationery at the same time to sort of give a wide spread of goods that we could sell. It was quite a long day. We started at 6:30 in the morning, it opened. The newspapers arrived by van at 6 o'clock in the morning, so to get up and be ready for the newspapers, which were dumped outside the shop at 6 in the morning. And it was open till 5:30 at night. That was the same for a Saturday, and on Sunday we closed at 12:30. On the weekends, when we got the newspapers, we had to put the newspapers together. It came in several bundles. There were magazines. If you've seen a weekend newspaper, it's got magazines and it's got various other inserts, and we had to put that together before we could actually sell the magazines. The biggest problem we had was if the driver in the van left a bundle of newspapers somewhere else. Might have been at Duddleton, or it might have been at Dulham, or somewhere else, maybe even up at the station, when the station used to be a news agents as well. So that's where I've been in the last 11 years up until I retired. Before that, way back, the business used to be joiners and funeral parlour. Funeral parlour was at the back of the business, and the joiners was at the front. Then in the 1930s, it was taken over by Greens to turn it into news agents. And then in the latter part of the 1930s, it was taken over by Edward Danks and his son Tom Danks, and they ran it until 1991. So, and then there was another 5 years for somebody else who ran it, and then I took it on. So that's generally the history of Sweet News. Sweet News wasn't always Sweet News. It was renamed in 1991 when the new owner took it over.
Okay. Thanks very much, Ian. Brian, please.
Hi, I came here and we opened a business in 1983, and then it was a draper shop, and I already had a pharmacy in Edinburgh, and my wife and I are both pharmacists, and we decided we'd like to expand and come down here. So we saw this business, we thought it was maybe not doing as well as it might do, so we just wrote them a letter through our lawyers and asked if they might be willing to sell, and they did. And we opened the pharmacy in November '83. And in that time, we stayed there till 2012, and I retired in 2012. And there's been a huge amount of changes within the world of pharmacy and how that operates. Before it was the Drapers, the business, I think, had only had 4 owners since the time of James VI. And I think that's still maybe now 6 owners. And in that time, I think it was owned by the town council and it was leased out. And for a long, long time, it used to be a butcher shop. Mr. Struth, where Greens and Blues is now, you won't remember this, but that was where Mr. Struth the butcher was. And prior to that, his father and grandfather were in where the pharmacy is now. And I remember Mr. Struth came over and asked him why he moved from such a big shop into a small shop way back when, and he said, it's on the wrong side of the street. And I wondered why that was, and it was because back in the day they didn't have fridges, and the sun would shine in the windows, and it'd make it too hot for all the meat and everything else. So that's why they moved on to the other side of the street. So that's a different story, but if you look in the books, you'll see the pharmacy as when it was a butcher's long, long time ago, and you used to come in, the door was in the side, one of the windows in the side street, and Market Street was the main door into the butcher shop. So that's me.
Thanks very much, Brian. Are we going to start some questions now?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to start across this young gentleman here, please.
So David,
Yes.
has the type of customers changed over the years? More tourists or different ages?
Good question. I would say that I haven't noticed. We've tended to always have more older customers, and that has probably still carried on till now. There's always been, because North Berwick has been a holiday destination, there has always been a lot of holiday customs. So the trade, if you like, doubles. We take twice as much in the summer as the winter. So in the winter, it's nearly all locals, and in the summer, it doubles, so it's half and half, roughly, for me. So I don't think it's really changed much for me in answer to that.
This lady here, please.
Has there always been an ice cream shop?
Good question.
Is that?
Ice cream? Yeah, there was. There was one along where near the TSB was, I remember.
And Lucas used to have a
Yes.
place. Lucas had a cafe ice cream parlour down Quality Street, and that was in the 70s. And also in the 60s, 70s, and actually before, there was a ice cream cafe where the lifeboat station is today, because the lifeboat, we had the lifeboat in North Berwick from 1860 through to 1926, and when we lost the lifeboat in 26, the building became a cafe ice cream parlour. But about the same time, Lucas was coming down with vans, and they were sitting down at the harbour terrace selling ice cream, so they've been around a long time.
Is the parking on the high street different now to what it was 50 years ago?
Yes. I'll let somebody else maybe answer the 50 years ago bit. But we have got obviously at the moment, there's the wooden planters, which are very nice with flowers in, but obviously they're all the way up the high street, and there's some restrictions. So there's less cars are able to come into the high street, and then you've got the question of whether you want the cars there or not, etc., which is maybe a bigger discussion. So 50 years.
But the high street used to be two-way until the end of 1950s, cars going both ways. And cars were physically a lot smaller than they are today, and there were very few of them. If you look at some of the very old photographs of North Berwick High Street, there are no cars. But today it's a lot busier and cars are a lot bigger.
Yes.
When I first came here in '83, I remember the little car park opposite,
Yes.
behind what was Goods and Garbs next to the coffee shop, which is called Steampunk. That used to empty during the day, and it was only really busy in the summertime, but in the wintertime it'd be empty. because people who lived in the houses and the flats in the high street maybe had, not everyone had a car by any manner of means, but they would park there at night and they'd go off to work during the day. So that car park was much easier to get in and out of during the day.
They did change the parking in the high street. I think it was probably around about the 2002, 2003, and they made it more restrictive, so you didn't have so long to park, and it was also 7 days a week instead of only 6 days as it used to be. And what they did then was they gave permits to people that were on the high street, lived on the high street, and I lived above the business, above Sweet News, and the permits came up to my house, and it allowed you then to park on 4th Street, and that was one of the concessions they made. But of course they wouldn't have taken all the cars on 4th Street that were on the high street parked with people that lived in the high street. So that's one of the changes in the mid-2000s.
Okay, next please.
What is the difference in cost from 50 years ago?
The difference in cost. If I go back, I've been in 43 years, so at 43 years, you're almost there. Then a big, when you say a difference in cost, I take one item, a big blue cylinder of gas that we sell, and we still sell them. They back then cost about £4.20, and now they're £52. So that's a big difference.
Brian, what's changing prices?
Well, the big change in pharmacy is probably drug prices. Back in, if you think about, you won't know, but in 1948, the National Health Service was created, and before then, if you wanted to go and see a doctor or get any medicines, you'd have to pay for it. There was nothing was free. And at that time, drug prices were really quite low, because it was just after 1948 where a huge revolution in drug development, and we brought all these new drugs. We were treating things we never used to treat before, and they all cost an awful lot of money. So you must have heard news stories now when you bring new drugs out and they cost hundreds and hundreds of pounds, or maybe tens of thousands of pounds to treat someone for a year on some specialised cases. So drug prices have increased enormously, and that's made an enormous impact on the National Health Service, and therefore on the taxpayer as well. So that would be, in my world, in pharmacy, that's where the big increase in prices in drug has happened.
Ian, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, newspapers have increased in price considerably, as has magazines and most of the other things. And I can remember selling a Times newspaper on a Monday morning for 10 pence. And the reason why people bought that, it was actually quite good for sports coverage, and it was also quite good because a lot of people liked doing the crossword in the Times. So a lot of people bought on the Monday the 10p Times, didn't bother buying the Times the rest of the week, but that was the time when they bought the Times. So in that days, but now everything is measured in pounds rather than pence.
But how people were paid was much lower as well, so it's probably in relation to what people were paid. So what you're buying, maybe a coffee now for £4, back in 1960, people would be throwing up their hands thinking they were buying a coffee for £4. And the culture has changed. You didn't have coffee shops in the way that you have coffee shops now. So it's not only just the prices of things, but wages have gone up too. So maybe it's not just as big a gap as you might think.
You have a question?
Brian, what do you sell now that you didn't sell before?
We probably sell less. Pharmacies probably are becoming more orientated into just selling. Back in the day, we used to sell perfumes and cosmetics and toiletries, but that's becoming less and less. Like Ian mentioned, there's much more pressure. People have got lots of other places to go and buy these things, like supermarkets and on the internet and everything else. And it's quite a good thing that we're not selling as many of these things, because it's much better, I think, for pharmacies to sell just pharmacy items, which would be medicines and of course the prescriptions.
Okay. You please.
This is for everyone. What is the oldest shop on the high street? Also, what is the newest one too?
I must be the oldest
I'm
trading
thinking it
one.
must be you.
Yeah, the Turnbull's Home Hardware is the oldest trading one. The name used to be Lawrence Turnbull's, and that was my dad. And he, as I say, he worked with he went to work straight there from school, and he eventually became a partner, and then he bought out in 1969. So 55 years ago, he bought out the person that he worked with. And so it's 55 years as the one family, Turnbull family, but a lot longer, 130 as a hardware store, but probably a lot longer than that. We've got 1903, we know that it was, the Whiteman family, but the Dalls, I think, looks like there's evidence from about 1850 or 1855 or something, so that's going back a long time. So that's my claim.
And the newest one, did you ask that as well?
Yeah.
I think the newest one might be Bonzo Art.
Oh, yeah.
Bonzo Art, next to Greg's. I think that might be.
It's the little unit on the left of Greg's.
I think that might be.
This one's for all of you. Over the past 10 years, what has been sold the most on the high street?
A category, like not an item, a category of goods, what's been sold the most, that's a difficult one.
I think when Woolworths were here, I would have said they sold probably the widest range and the most of things in the high street, I would have thought.
The widest range, I've got 8,000. Do you think anybody will have more than that? Louis would have had that, because they had a lot of bigger items. We've got a massive amount of small things and little packets and everything.
But there are two newsagents on the high street. I'm just trying to think. There are two chemists, pharmacists on the high street. You get sweeties in quite a lot of shops.
It'll be basic things you would think, like, I don't know, bread, or it'll be the very basic
Newspapers and
things.
things.
Yes, newspapers, yeah.
There's lots and lots of funny ones. Like, all of you know soda stream cylinders? You put them in a drinks machine. So we sell about 1,600 of them a year. And, they're quite a lot of money. That's about £10 for people buying them. And then the most popular, the most common purchase in the shop is refuse sacks, the black sacks. And I can't even tell you how many of them. It's thousands and thousands and thousands. We bundle them in tens. So, and then there's other very popular things like drain cleaner. So there's odd ones as well.
So your question, please.
What did the high street and the shops look like during the war?
During the war, I think we need you for
Well,
that one, John.
it was a thriving high street. All the shops that you know today, the buildings were very much the same, different shops obviously. Just prior to the war and maybe just after the war, there was something like 3 fishmongers, 4 butchers, about 2 or 3 newsagents.
I think there are 2 branches of Boots, am I all right?
2 branches of Boots.
2 branches of Boots.
Boots used to be, where Bostock is?
Yeah.
Boots actually traded from there. And do you know where Westgate Gallery is? They had a shop there as well. So the east and west branch. And then in 1953, they went into the shop that you know today. There's quite a lot of groceries.
Bakers, wasn't there?
Bakers, grocers, because there was no Tesco's, no Aldi's. To do your shopping, you went down the high street. And
Probably
people,
daily.
yeah,
Probably
or maybe
daily,
twice
yeah.
daily
Yeah,
even.
yeah.
And people would walk down the street. They couldn't afford cars. There was no cars.
There's a lot of tea rooms in that as well for a lot of the visitors coming.
North Berwick was a very big holiday destination for June, July and August, and as Ian was suggesting, there's a lot of holiday makers there. And people used to move out their homes to rent out their bedrooms to holiday makers, things like that.
What was the most popular shop on the high street around 15 years ago?
There wasn't, I don't think there was one shop.
I think all the shops help each other. That's why when I first came here, I remember David's dad coming to see me, and I was just qualified in the shop, and they were just pleased to see us in the shop, because at that time there'd been a bit of a depression, and a lot of shops were empty, and they were pleased to see something like a pharmacy coming in, because people need a pharmacy and they'll use a pharmacy like they use a baker or a butcher or whatever. And why he was happy to see that, because it brings footfall. You know what I mean by footfall? It means people just are passing in the street. So even if they're passing in the street and no intention to go somewhere else, they might just pop into the hardware store or into the newsagent, and it's just having that volume of people in the street, and that helps. So all the shops helped each other, because everyone had a different reason for coming down, and then they'd meet friends or whatever, or they'd go to other things and think, well, I'm here, I might as well go and do this. So that's missing a wee bit now. The street's probably not as busy as it used to be, because of people have got so many other places to go and shop.
And I think there's a lot of loyalty back then.
Yes.
I mean, there used to be, like, Struth's had a butcher shop, Eels had a butcher shop, and you know, my mum went to Struth's, other people's went to Eels, and we went to Struth's all the time. And I think that might be the same as newsagents and farm hardware. You either went,
there was 2 hardware
there was
stores.
2 hardware stores, so you either went to
Crawford's,
Yes, yes.
Barton, and my dad went for a
and
coffee
you go
with
to
him.
Brian's shop, or you
Yeah.
go to Boots. So I think loyalty was quite
Yeah.
strong, maybe 50
Especially in a small town. In a big city, that's not the same.
Yeah.
But in a small town, people tend to go to the same places, have the same habits.
Further to that, you said 50 years ago, a wee bit later than that, in the early 1980s, when there was a recession, there was, I'm positive, I'm sure I remember correctly, there was about 14 shops either for sale or empty in the high street in North Berwick. And North Berwick is a very good town. We've got a good high street and a lot of independence, and it's still the envy of many. And to have 14 not attracting anybody down High Street was awful, absolutely awful.
Well, in '96 when we came, it were 8,
All right.
because I hadn't really counted it when I looked at the shop and
Yeah.
decided to buy, and I then counted the number of empty shops and thought, what have I done here? But no, I mean, you can see how resilient the high street actually is. I mean, shops don't lie empty for very long. I mean, the one that lay empty for quite some time was where Why Not is now, and it was because it was so big. It was a supermarket before, and then it was going to be divided up as it is just now, and that's been a big help to fill the shops.
Any question?
Were shop signs different in that way? Were they different?
I missed the beginning of that.
Were shop signs different?
Shop signs.
Yeah, I think so. I think pharmacy signs back in the day used to have like a mortar and pestle. You know what that is? It's like a. So I remember every Boots branch used to have a mortar and pestle out it, and I think you used to go and get your shoes fixed, and there'd be maybe made of brass or whatever. It'd be like a shoe or a boot. And now we've got the pharmacy sign. It's like the Green Cross, the European sign for pharmacy. Hardware stores.
Hardware stores. I mean, we've had hammers and things. I think what you're saying is that maybe back then they were quite specific to the type of shop they were, and maybe nowadays, with people being able to access so much information, you know, the Green Cross or whatever it is that you're doing, it's more general. It's to attract a much bigger audience. So just showing a resoling of a shoe or a hammer or something like that is maybe not enough. And I think they've changed in that way. They want to appeal to as big an audience as possible.
The signs above the shops were, I think, almost always hand painted by the local painters, whereas now I think you can get prefabricated plastic ones. But like there was Seaton's in North Berwick, and Douglas Seaton would come along and redo the paintwork. It was all done by
I think
hand.
he was called a decorator and sign writer.
Yes,
Yes,
right.
that's right, Brian.
Yeah.
They were specialised.
Yeah.
New question, please.
How much has your shop grown since it first opened?
Can I just say I've got one, I've just shrunk. The North Berwick shop's got bigger because I bought that garden out the back and took away the fence in between, and it's all concreted now, so that's made it bigger. But I had a shop in Dunbar up until Friday last week, and it was a wee bit bigger than the one here, but it wasn't as commercially viable. In the end, I decided to shut that one. So that one's shut, and it's sad in one way from that point of view, but I am 60 and I need to move things along, and I was maybe doing a lot of work for not an awful lot of money. So that one is now shut, but the one here is very secure, and it has had 2 extensions over the years to the length of the building, and then I rebuilt the garden bit at the back, and then bought the yard. So it's probably in the Turnbull's time of having it, my dad and myself, it'll be overall, inside space is probably trebled 3 times.
In my case, it was, if anything, the pharmacy is split into 2. You had the front shop, and then you had the dispensary. And before I retired, we were increasing the size of the dispensary because it was busier, and also we had an area for consultation area, because we have a contract, pharmacists have a contract with the National Health Service, and the National Health Service wanted us to do more things, and were paying us to do more things to help the GPs out, because the GPs, the general practitioners, your local doctors, were being overwhelmed. So there's lots of things they felt that pharmacists could do to help, and we could do things and take some of the strain off the GPs.
I think as far as Sweet News is concerned, I mean, we were constrained by the size of the shop itself. We couldn't extend out the back, and we couldn't extend sideways. But what we had to do in the time we were there was change the range of goods that we sold. So we took on a wider range of goods, and that had to be displayed. So we fitted the shop to take into account a wider range of goods.
Alright, how do you get your customer feedback, and how would you rate customer satisfaction on a scale of 1 poor to 10 excellent?
You see what sort of job you're going to get.
Well, certainly in my case, we were independent. So that's the sort of thing that big companies would probably really be interested in, getting feedback on how they were doing. In a place like North Berwick, it was like a wee bit like common sense. It was important to keep your customers and look after your customers, and be kind and polite and everything else. So you hoped you were doing the right thing, and in your interaction with customers, I think you got a good bit of feedback there. Then, if you were doing the right thing, and like John was saying earlier, people were more loyal to you. Yes. So if they were coming back to you, that was a good sign. Maybe you were doing the right thing, and they were happy with the service you were giving them.
I think one of the other things that you also noticed as well is that mother and fathers would come into the shop and buy their goods, and then the families would also come as well, and it was sort of turnover that way as you could get the whole families coming. But if you were there yourself, as in the case of David and myself and Brian, we were always there in the shop, so you knew a lot of your customers, so you got that feedback in itself from the customers and the repeat the customers. One of the things I do know that changed for me while I was in the business was when they closed off the bottom of Law Road. Yeah, closed off the bottom of Law Road where Struth the Butcher used to be,
Greens and Blues now.
And Greens and Blues now, and that stopped a lot of the traffic, because in my business it was very much people dropping in quickly, getting what they wanted, and went on their way to work or whatever it was. And that changed the whole dynamics, because people then couldn't be bothered going all the way around Kirkports and into the east end of the high street and coming along to the shop. And this is where the parking was also important as well, because if you had sort of customers which were just dropping in, they needed to park, they needed to stop, get in, get their goods and go away again. And a lot of people, instead of coming into the high street, went out and got their things at the petrol station, at the Dalrymple petrol station.
I think you've maybe possibly hit the nail on the head, and I wasn't joking when I said maybe that's what you'll get a job in. It's a difficult one. Independents and smaller businesses are often guilty of not taking these surveys and maybe acting upon them, and we would very often decide that, well, we are, as Brian said, using common sense or whatever. I know that my wife, who's works in a university now and was in the NHS before that, huge organisations, if I say I'm doing something, then she would be saying, well, how would you measure that, and what's the outcome, and she'd have all the technical questions, and I've not got that feedback. So maybe I am lacking on it. It's just whether or not it would make a difference if you did do these surveys and got that information. But I don't think I could. I think it's probably very worthwhile. And keep asking.
As a small organisation, you've got to think of the
Yes.
cost of doing that to what the benefit
Yes.
would be. You know.
As long as it was really, if you've got the right questions that were going to make you take the necessary action. I mean, there's words for all of that, but yeah, you can ask a lot of questions, but they have to be the right ones, and you have to act upon them.
Right, this is where we're going to turn it on you.
Oh,
guys.
Yeah.
we could be
We're gonna
vicious.
ask-
I was going to ask, how important do you think it is that North Berwick is a high street? Would you be bothered if there was only half the shops or no shops? Would that trouble you, or would you think, I don't care, I can get on the internet or go to the supermarket?
Does it matter?
Yeah, go on then.
It would. I do sometimes go there, so it would make a sort of a fair. Some people go around to the high street here as well, so it may, if there was like more shops and like you would not really care. It was not you would no sorry you would care. It's just like because the high street's been around here for a long time, so it's
Okay.
like and mostly like you said, everyone used to shop there.
Okay.
So,
What do you think?
For me, I hang out there quite a lot with my friends, so I think it's good that there's quite a lot of shops there. So then, if they get bored, then they can just go looking around the different shops.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you?
I think maybe if the shops weren't there, it would maybe like a lot of people would notice that, and it might be a big difference for them because some people might live down at the high street and shop down at the high street. So if there was no shops down at the high street, they might have to go to a different town and shop there.
Okay. What do you think?
As you said, North Berwick is a holiday destination, so people would be a bit like confused if they went because a lot of people think the high street is part of North Berwick's history. So people would be a bit.
Do you think people would want to live in North Berwick if there was no shops?
I think one of the reasons that a lot of people want to live here is that there's a lot of good shops.
But what if you just had one big Tesco? Is that not enough? Why is it not enough?
because they sell the same products. They just sell Tesco products. Then we want a different product from the
Okay.
high street.
What if there was just a couple of, or 2 or 3 big shops, but lots of cafes and restaurants and places like that to go for which are very popular for your coffees and teas and cakes and food? Do you think the high street could continue if it was just full of food shops and cafes?
I don't think so, because we've got the same children. Sometimes people who work there, because they've got shut down and food and drinks and stuff, would be nice. And also, if that actually happened and people voted for it, people in like dressing brands and like all the like Greg and not Greg, Save the Children and all that.
Ah, yes.
If it got like shut down and people would have jobs and that.
If things like Costa and other popular hot drink places were gone, then I think a lot less people would probably go to the high street because people like normally when I go to the high street I get like a hot chocolate from Costa and
Yes.
hang out with my friends and stuff. So
And that's important, isn't it?
yeah.
To go and meet your friends.
So you think that the high street is an important meeting place? Here's a leading question.
Should we have cars in the high street? Should we pedestrianise it or not? Go on then.
Yes.
I think that there should be a decent sized car park outside of it because like yeah, but like a bigger one than it actually is because still a lot of cars like to just park there, park on the high street, and sometimes that like kind of gets in the way if you want to like get somewhere like a post office quite quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes like cars can get in the way and stuff.
Okay.
I'm thinking not too many cars, because sometimes it could be a bit busy if you drive down to the high street and then there's just like no parking spaces, and the shop that you're trying to go to and you're trying to park near it, there's no parking spaces, so you have to park far away from it and walk to it, and you might be in a rush to get somewhere.
So if any of you live, I'll quickly just say that, but you'll answer your questions first.
And also, it's like a bit difficult for cars as well.
Yeah.
From the average
Sure.
car point of view. It's like because it's like a one-way street, and cars like get muddled up there, and there's like loads of chaos and everything, and like sometimes in traffic. And if there's for some reason, if for example a new brand comes up, for example like Tesco, like a big Tesco comes up and it takes up some shops, it'll affect the traffic as well, because everyone will want to go to Tesco on the high street. And if they like lowered the prices in Tesco there, everyone will want to go to that Tesco, so there'll be like loads of cars and loads of traffic.
Yes.
The amount of cars is okay if there was a few more pedestrian crossings,
Right.
because sometimes you have to wait forever,
Right.
because there's a car and then there's like 5 more behind it, so you can't really get anywhere.
That's a very good point, because when they were doing the traffic survey and that was one of the things that came out. There wasn't enough pedestrian crossings, and especially for older people and people that are sort of disabled and need to cross slowly, and they're frightened to cross because of the amount of traffic.
Can we just ask you, what's your favourite shops? Or cafes or whatever? We'll go round. What's your favourite shop?
Probably Bostock.
Sorry?
Bostock.
Probably Sugar Mountain.
Mm.
Sugar Mountain and Costa. I don't really know.
Probably nicer or Boston.
Probably Costa, the art shop, or maybe like Rex.
Mine for lunch, I would maybe go to MB Eats. It's a quite small shop.
I quite like Costa and the Rock and Bird shop, like where you can get all your stationery and stuff.
Oh yeah.
I still like Sugar Mountain or something sweet. Costa and Landers.
Probably Costa, Rock and Bird, and Great Escape.
Costa, Greg's, and Sugar Mountain.
Costa's the place to go, isn't it?
We've missed out some,
Yeah.
So, just to finish off, guys, maybe 3 questions,
Sure.
one for each of you. Hands up, who wants to ask a question?
Were there items used to sell that you would like to sell but don't?
Items you'd like to sell but don't.
That's got them stumped.
Yeah.
I would like to sell but don't. Just something I'm interested in is kayaks, and I was very close to that. I mounted 3 second-hand ones I had on the back fence of the shop during lockdown when it was hard to buy kayaks, and I sold. It was actually 3 and then another one. I sold 4 there, and it seriously made me think about carrying kayaks. But because they're big, I would have to discontinue a lot of lines that I already did, so I didn't really have space. So that would be it. Right, we've got lots of.
Anyway, yeah.
Do any of you guys know how long Sugar Mountain has been on the high street?
It's for 15 years, isn't it?
Probably at least.
Yeah, it was there before I retired, so yeah, I would say it's probably 18 years or something.
Long enough to damage all your teeth.
Yeah.
So we think about 20 years maybe towards that.
Does your family still own the business, David Turnbull?
I do. So yes, so my father owned it, and we bought the second store in Dunbar, and we carried on like that since 1984 with the 2. And then, as I say, I've just shut that one. So the North Berwick store is, I went into it in 1980, and I've owned it since about 2000. So that's 24 years.
Just 2 more questions.
how regular are shops restocked today versus previously?
Well, in our in pharmacy, we move from buying lots of stock at once, maybe for 6 to 8 weeks or longer, and now we're buying drugs on a need-to basis. From like medicines, we'll buy it if we use it, we'll order it, and it'll even come the same day. So it's on a daily basis. So literally, we don't have any back stock. It'll just be what's in the shelves in the pharmacy.
Is that coming from a big wholesaler?
Yeah, big wholesalers like Unichem or Vestric, as they were called, or Phoenix. You'll see the vans going round, and there must be 4 or 5 pharmacy vans come from different people supplying different drugs every day into North Berwick.
You've maybe seen a great big blue home hardware van that delivers to the shop twice a week, and it's done that since 2000, so 24 years, 1999 in fact, and that covers the vast majority of what's in the shop. So I get other things as well. Before that, the main supplier was once a week, and since for the last 24 years, it's been twice a week, and it's a huge delivery, everything from compost and coal to teaspoons and not plants, but everything else.
Ian, do you?
We used to have deliveries on sort of rolling basis. Our greetings cards used to come in on a weekly basis. Our sweets and drinks and that used to come in on a weekly basis. But I also used to go to cash and carries, one in Glasgow and one in Edinburgh, where I would get sort of goods that not everybody had, not the supermarkets and that, which gave people a choice. But then laterally, before I retired, that was all changing because a lot of the cash and carries were disappearing because manufacturers didn't want to deal with a third party and have to pay them a commission for selling goods. So that all changed as well. So you were then restricted to where you can get your goods.
Last question.
What's your opinion on the high street, and would you change anything?
Wow.
I think, well, I don't know if you noticed in the news today or this week, there's been a huge controversy about the parking proposals that the council have put forward. And last week, I think they were thinking of dropping it, and the council officials wanted to reconsider, but the politicians have said no, they're going to go ahead with it this week. So I think they're going to go ahead with different parking restrictions and asking people to pay for that. And someone mentioned earlier about having more parking areas outside the high street. Well, they're not offering that. So I agree something has to be done about it, but I really don't know what the answer is. But that is going to have an impact, I would think, even more on the high street, because it's going to be even more difficult for people to come down, for those people who want to come in cars. And the other problem is, you must have seen the state of the high street. If you go along there in your car, you're bumping along, or on your bike, it's in a terrible state of repair. So these things need to be fixed, I think. In an ideal world, it'd be lovely to have a beautiful pedestrianised area with off-street car parking, and people would walk onto the high street and use it. And you're talking about Coston coffee shops. It'd be lovely to do that in the summertime, but I'm not sure how practical that is.
Yeah, the problem is there's not areas just off the high street that are empty that could be developed into more parking. So you would have to knock down people's houses or flats, or and you can't do that. So everywhere that the few places that were empty were all built into more houses over the years, and we haven't got land that's sitting there that could be used for parking. So although it might be nice to have a pedestrian area where you could all walk about, you would need to have the parking just away from the high street. And if people have to pay, my worry is very strongly, if you're going to have to pay, you'll put them off, and you make it easier for them to then, or push them towards edge of town shopping, like saying if there was more development up where Tesco's is, if there was more put up there, then you don't have to pay and people would go up that way. Or Dunbar's the same, lots of towns, they have an area on the outside of the town that is quite often getting bigger, and people can park there, and so you'll take people away from the high street. And the same with on the edge of Edinburgh, Fort Kinnaird and all these other big shopping areas. they don't have to pay. So I would not want to bring in charging for the town.
And then you've got the internet, of course.
And the internet, massively, double-digit growth for years and years.
It doesn't take very much to sort of, you know, change the dynamics of the high street. You know, something like the parking, as David had said, you know, if people being charged to park in the high street, you know, okay, they were speaking about a free period on the high street, and there was at one stage 45 minutes, then that was increased to 60 minutes and so on. And I was chairman of the Business Association, and I think we've discussed the parking in North Berwick for every year since I arrived here, and it's still being discussed yet, and nobody's got a solution for it. Because there's so many people got different ideas of what parking should be about. I mean, there's a food of thought that it should be pedestrianised, and that, you know, people should be able to come down, and cyclists and so on. The big problem with that, again, you change the dynamics, and I can tell you, when we had the business, and if the high street was closed off, when they resurfaced it, and they did it twice in the time when I was in the business, that really killed my business for that period of a week when it was being done. It really did. And the difficulty then was to track back the people who got another different routine. You had to get them back to come back to get your business going again.
Guys, that's all the time I've got. I really appreciate us giving us time so we could come and speak to you today. I hope you've really enjoyed it. And could say very much thanks to Mrs. Penman and to Andrew, who has filmed this for Historic Environment Scotland. And thanks, guys. I hope you've learned something.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chris.
everyone. Yeah.